Today's episode was brought to you by Wild Bill's Fireworks, PopChevy.com, and the Kent Rose Foundation. This episode is also brought to you by TheForkEnd.com. Today we welcome our special guest, Mike Robertson.
Well, Harold, we got a good old buddy with us today. We've known for quite some time and done a lot of stuff with our buddy Mike Robertson.
Yeah, Mike, it's great to see you again, and we want to welcome you to Behind the Shed.
All right, always great to see you, Harold. Great to see you again.
Too,
great
buddy.
to be here.
And we look forward to this visit, and we're gonna spend a little time reminiscing and let you tell us how you got here and why and when and what you've been doing since that time. So we thank you for coming today to visit with us on Behind the Shed.
Absolutely, man.
Wouldn't have missed it.
Tell us about how you got in the record industry. How'd that start for you? Well,
it kind of started with the live business. So the little town that I grew up in, there was only one person that ever well, let me back up for a minute. It's always interesting to me, like when you start thinking about this, driving out here, I'd kind of forget, you kind of forget a lot of things about what a small community it is or was back then and how we're all tied together. So this little town I grew up in only had one person that had ever done anything in the music business, and that was Donnie Lowry, that worked for you guys, obviously, that signed over at Music Mill.
Yeah.
And a good friend of mine, a guy named Larry Slider, that had helped him kind of get a record deal with Elektra and kind of had pitched him and financed him in the early days, was a mentor kind of mine. And so through him, he had a little resort, and we started booking bands in it, and I went, well, this beats the heck out of hauling hay, so and a lot more fun and paid better. So from that, I got to know a bunch of bands, started booking bands into fraternities, sororities, and then that kind of led to all the bands we booked in his little resort. I started booking in the summer or the fall or whoever, since I knew the bands. That led to us owning a little lighting company and a staging company, and then eventually we put in a small little recording studio. And it somewhere, this was in the early '80s, I figured out that I didn't want to be building stages in Louisiana heat, being the first one in, the last one out. I also figured out I didn't want to be trying to find some drunk frat boy to collect a check from after I'd booked a band for him that night.
Yeah.
So I was under the misunderstanding that Nashville needed another recording studio or another guy that wanted to be in the music business, and moved a little studio to Nashville after doing that. That was in 1983. After doing that, in Louisiana, kind of doing everything you can do. I'll tell you an interesting story. The first time I ever went in a professional studio, talking about how we're all kind of tied together in ways that, hopefully the next generation gets to have these connections, was Donnie and Lowry and Mac McAnally invited me over to Muscle Shows to kind of see how things work. And the first on that session, they cut Old Flame. And, I was still living in Louisiana, and our lighting company, it seemed like 15 minutes later, but it probably wasn't a year later, we were doing lights for Alabama shows that were selling out in 15 minutes, and everybody's holding up their Bic lighter and everything. And I was like, there's nothing to this business. It's like you go cut a song, you put it out, it's all great. And the funny thing was, having not been in a studio before, seeing how it all worked, Clayton Ivey played the intro on that demo.
That's right.
And it was very complicated. It was like this big intro. And when Clayton left, Mac stayed and played that simple little part that became, the lick. And for me, it was like, because we were, I don't know what we were, 21, 23, something. We were 21 maybe. And just to see, like, I didn't know how it all worked. For all I knew, those guys were like the boss, since Mac wrote for them, was getting a draw. And to see somebody, even at Mac's at that age, that had the confidence to go back in and go, that's not what this needs,
That's funny you bring that up, because when we made that record, I had to call Clayton. I couldn't figure out the chords and the way he played it, and it was just for 3-chord guy was just a little too complicated, so called Clayton, and he told us it's this. He told us the chords, and then we finally got it figured out. But that's interesting.
Yeah, man, it's funny.
Yeah. Really small world. So we moved the studio up, and then started. Eventually found a place to kind of light. An artist, Lobo, Kent Lavoie, had a building that didn't have much studio gear but had some space. So I did a kind of a trade out to him to put the studio in there, and we started running the studio, and then used that
was
as
1030,
a tour.
right?
1030 16th Avenue South, which is now a giant high rise, but they kept the number. The big high rise. It's called the 1030 is the building, which I was kind of glad that little bit of history survived.
Yeah.
And then then I kind of figured out that I'd grown up. My parents owned little mom and pop stores, and I kind of figured out pretty early on that business was kind of where I did best, and signed who I still think is one of the most underrated singers in Nashville history was John Wesley Riles was my first management client.
Oh yeah,
the best ever.
And got John a deal. We had gone into we'd gone in and cut a bunch of demos and shopped it all over town. Of course, I could barely get in a door, and but with any door I could get in, we'd shopped it in and couldn't, nobody would say yes. Now, John had already had a bunch of hits by then. Like, he had already had 3 careers. His first hit was at 17, 16 years old. And
and that was Kate.
That's right.
Still a great song.
I
record.
Still remember that one.
Yeah, and a little bit of a pop hit. I think it showed up on the pop charts.
It was a pop hit, yes.
So couldn't get a deal. So Bob Montgomery I'd met, who was hot at the time, and Bob went, well, if you want to go do 8-team session guys, it's $20,000, and we can go in and cut 4 sides. So we did, and cut 4 things that turned out great. And went back out there, went everywhere in town, and nobody still signed it. So now I owed the bank $20,000. I'd signed a note, and just about the time we had run out of gas, I had Brian Williams that got hired at SunTrust and knocked on the door, and whatever it was, Third National back then, said, "Hey, we're calling that note you've been paying the interest on every 90 days."
Ouch.
So about that time, Glenn Middleworth pitched one of the songs that we cut that also John wrote that I published, Starting Over Again, to Steve Wariner and to Tony Brown and Steve, and they cut it, which kept me in town. I tell people, I tell those guys every time I see them, I was like, I would probably be the best used car salesman in Ruston, Louisiana had you guys not cut that song and kept me in town, bought me some more time. And then Barry Beckett signed John Wesley, and we had a couple of more minor hits, and they took half the masters, and so between Barry and Steve and Tony, they kind of kept me in Nashville.
Yeah,
that's cool, man. I remember those days.
Love John Wesley.
Me too, man.
Oh God, such a
singer.
singer.
There's no telling how many records he sang.
All that early Randy Travis stuff. On the other hand,
a lot of stuff we did.
Tons of Alan Jackson stuff.
Yeah. So go ahead.
You won't remember it, Harold. No reason you would remember it, but I tell you, when you're just trying to get your foot in those doors I was talking about and getting to meet people, Donnie was good enough, and you were gracious enough.
Back up for a second. Donnie Lowry wrote for the music, wrote for Harold at the time, wrote Old Flame.
And co-wrote Old Flame.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and to invite us to one of your Music Mill Christmas parties, and it was somewhere on Murfreesboro Road. And it was in my early days, maybe 85, something like that, 86, somewhere there maybe, definitely between 83 and 90. And Randy Owen was there, and it's all your writers and everything, and just one of those things when you're just trying to, trying to get a foothold, just getting invited to something like that, and being around it. And you were so gracious and came over and introduced yourself to me and my wife, and it was just so nice. And we had it was obviously been a Christmas party. I'd moved my wife from Louisiana away from all of her family, so getting back for Christmas in a timely manner was a big deal. So we delayed our trip and left at 11 o'clock that night after your party. Drove I-40 all the way to Little Rock in one lane because it was a snow and ice storm.
Oh, my goodness.
God.
I kept thinking we're going to drive out of this eventually. Well, we did. About the time we hit the Louisiana line, we finally drove out of it. We got to El Dorado, Arkansas before we found dry deal. But it was it's just one of those moments that just, like Barry saying, yes, this is the best thing I ever heard when I brought John John Wesley, and actually he said, this is the best singer I've heard since I've been behind this desk. He had just gotten the Warner A&R job. So it's little things like that, getting to be somewhere where you felt like, you got to meet some people or somebody giving you a little confidence to say, yeah, you're right, because everybody else had just zero interest at all in John. And I'm just going, I don't know much, but this guy can sing,
Yes.
and eventually, somebody saying yes and it just kind of changes your whole perspective that maybe you do have an idea of what's going on and what's good and what's not.
Right. Hey, I want to interrupt real quick. I want you to keep going, but I want to interrupt real quickly. In the days when you had first come up here and you had the 1030 building, I'd like to paint a picture real quick because we knew each other back then. Before I came up and came to work with you, I was down in Muscle Shoals, and I was working 3 or 4 gigs, and I'd come up on Fridays and pitch songs. I got to know Mike, and Mike rented me a space in that building, at 1030 building, for $100 a month. And he'd have to call me every 2 or 3 months and say, man, I really need that rent. I really didn't have it. That's where we were back then.
Yeah, actually,
and you know that story. You lived it too.
Actually, it was 75, and he was always late, and I noticed.
I thought it was 100. It was. Oh my God! But you were a good landlord.
No, it was. Yeah, it was basically a closet. I don't know if you could really call it an office.
It worked.
But it, yeah. And
you had a great deal anyway.
Yes, I had a great deal.
You sure did.
But we became friends way back then. Okay, go ahead. So
no, we did. And back to that small community.
Yeah.
Then Lisa Ramsey was my first assistant I could afford on the road. I shared her with somebody else. And then Russ hired her away to go to Music Mill. And there again, it just keeps.
We poached her, yep.
It just keeps turning. What a small, kind of what a small world.
I didn't realize all those connections.
Yeah. And I can't even remember some other publisher, I think, sent Russ over to see me because he knew I had an office space, and that's kind of how we met there. And then Tony Hazelton, through that same relationship, and I were, lifelong
Louisiana
friends.
guys too,
both Louisiana guys and lifelong friends. So
just all those relationships and friendships, all these years.
Well, you were knocking on the right doors,
Yeah, just getting somebody to crack them.
That's it.
And it was always so great with Music Mill. You guys were, the door had a lock on it, but it wasn't one of those things where nobody could enter. It was always pretty easy to get in and hang out in the lobby and be around stuff. And it wasn't, you didn't run the kind of shop where people didn't feel welcome, so people were.
It was part of our business plan to listen to everybody that had a song.
Yeah, man.
Yeah. No,
and we did that. We listened.
Yep, no doubt. And it made a difference. I tell you, we were there late one night. We'd passed through with Donnie, and they were mixing in the small room. They were mixing a Anne Murray record, and it was, who was that engineer?
Eric Legg? No. I don't know who did it.
Yeah, I can't remember. His great engineer. But anyway, he said, hey, you guys want to come hear something, and that's just the way the town worked back then. So
that might have been Billy Sherrill.
It might have been the producer. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't Billy. It wasn't Billy. It was
the
somebody.
Engineer.
Yeah, the engineer. Yeah, it wasn't Billy because I knew Billy pretty well. Somebody I didn't know as well. Yeah. But he played us, and it was a little good news today.
Oh man!
And that record. Hearing that on your big speakers in that room. But just hearing something there again is somebody young trying to figure it all out. Hearing something and going, that is so good, and then seeing what happened with it. How big a record it became.
Really big,
like hearing stuff before it happened versus after it happened. Everybody can figure it out after it's already there, but all those little moments of being able to be around stuff.
Now, who wrote that? Do you remember? I think it was
I do.
Someone at Welk.
Yep.
A little good news today.
Yep.
It was Anderson.
Louis Anderson.
Louis Anderson.
Yeah.
Louis
I think
Anderson?
by himself, I think.
I thought there were a couple other writers.
There might have been. I thought he did by himself.
But
My
anyway,
goodness.
great song.
Yeah, man.
Great song. But yeah, those doors were always, kind of open there. So So all of that, John Wesley led me to, I saw you kind of go to everything you can go to, and there was some seminar at some little panel thing at one point, and John Prine was on it, and I had it was a real kind of career defining moment. That somebody said he had that record company he had started. Oh boy! And back then artists didn't do record companies. And somebody from the audience, when it got to the question and answer session, said, "John, how do you start a record company?" He said, "Well, it's really not that complicated. He said, you put your hand on a rock and you say, I'm a record company. So that's kind of how I became a manager after thinking I wanted to be a publisher and seeing how hard it was how long it took to make any money doing that and what deep pockets you needed to have. So we went on to sign through that. After John Wesley, it was kind of like I did that by default. I wasn't planning on being the manager. He just didn't have one. And wound up signing through the 90s Leroy Parnell and Wade Hayes and Pam Tillis and Black Hawk, and worked with the Dirt Band a while, a bunch of people. Patty Loveless I've worked with for 30 years now. But Russ, actually, I'd kind of forgotten this till I was driving out here, mentioned Leroy to me. He was playing at the Bluebird. He said, man, I know you like that blues stuff, it's kind of like that's your thing. You got to go see this guy, down at the Bluebird. And Leroy was one of my early acts that I worked with, after John Wesley in that window of time. So
great act, Leroy. Great act. Yeah.
We'll save the Leroy stories for later because we've got him later this week. But that was a good one, man. For a while, in the 90s, you had 3 or 4 acts that were having hit records at one time.
Yeah, it was great, man.
You had been like a kind of starting, then all of a sudden you had one act, and all of a sudden I'd come to your office. There was like 30 people in there working, and stuff was going real fast, and it just seemed like it just went overnight to me.
Yeah, after 8 years of going backwards and not making a living. It was instant. It all happened really fast.
But you had Pam and Leroy and Wade was
at
going.
The same time,
and there was something else going on then, too. I can't remember which one it was now, but it was crazy.
No, it was a great run, and back then you could have a hit in 13 weeks. So, like at radio, you could go have a number one record in 12, 13 weeks, so it wasn't like the half a year or so. We at one point, drove by the Sony building, and they had the big banners up, and 2 of them were ours,
That's
two different
cool.
artists,
I remember, man. Interesting too, Harold, I'll tell you. Mike wasn't just like most managers. Mike was actually an A&R guy. Yeah. Mike got a lot of songs cut on his acts because he knew, and if ever I had anything for any of them, the first place I went was to him if he managed them, not even the producer. So that was always cool. He had a great song sense.
Yeah, and I always felt like, that there wasn't anything that I was probably going to do for my client that day than if we happened to stumble across a hit song. It was like, what's going to, make the bus wheels roll any easier than a hit. So, during that period, we got a phone call. Harold won't know that I got the call, but he probably remembers why I got the call. When you were living in the house you built, out off of Franklin Road at the corner there, we got a call from your office, your assistant, and my assistant said, Harold,
you're not going to know this is so good.
Harold Shedd's office is on the phone. I said, well, that's well, because I knew you, but we didn't have any acts together or anything. Well, that's interesting. I wonder what Harold's office is calling about. She said, hey, I just want you to know, somebody at your office said that, Pam Tillis lived where Harold Shedd lives, and they told the tour bus companies that. So all the tour bus companies are riding by Harold's house all the time, doing their announce deals, slowing traffic down in front of your driveway. So I went, well, we wouldn't have done that, and so I went back to Carol Harper, who ran my office deal, and I said, Carol, would anybody here sent people to Harold's house telling them that's where Pam lived? And she had this deer in headlights look. And what had happened was those companies would always call the management offices or anybody they could to try to find out where a star lived, because back then, for people that don't know, they had these tour bus deals that you paid money, you rode around town, and they drive by the stars' houses, and they all had a megaphone, and you could hear them like saying as they drove by, this is where so and so lives, this is where Ronnie Millsap. Well, Harold's house was not far from Millsap and Minnie and a lot of those other artists. Right. So what had happened was they kept calling the office, and finally Carol told the little girl, whoever we had at the front desk at the time, we didn't know it was, so they didn't know it was Harold's house. That was just an address, as such and such, whatever. Where Pam lives. I said, just tell them yes. So they did. They did, and so we accidentally sent everybody to Harold.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I said, get on the phone, call those people, tell them that's not.
Oh, that's funny. Oh my God, that's funny.
Today's episode was brought to you by Wild Bill's Fireworks, PopChevy.com, and the Kent Rose Foundation. This episode is also brought to you by theforkend.com.
Well, different world back then for sure. Golly.
Yeah. It was
man.
Small community, and all those things, just what a small community it was. I was at, a bunch of us went down. I was there when KT did her showcase, that when she got her deal in that block building down on 16th, kind of past
Music Row.
Yes,
back then.
showcase or whatever it was. So, there were just so many things. I mean, put it this way: there were so few things at certain venues and events that kind of we all had that common shared deal. I mean, I'm sure there's 40 other people I know that had nothing to do with KT or that deal that were just there because you heard how good it was, that night. And everybody was looking for a way to fill the house up with other industry people. So when the label came, you had a good crowd.
Yep.
And for clarity, that was when KT showcased for looking for a record deal, right? So, and got one.
Got one.
Yeah.
At 48 years old?
Yeah.
Unheard of.
Well, I always loved how, and I use you as an example many times of, doing things that weren't the norm. I mean, KT, Billy Ray, the Headhunters, Alabama, like none of that would, if you just went, what is a country act today? What do you need to sign? What do they need to look like, sound like, feel like? Not to mention Shania, it's like.
And Toby.
Yeah, and Toby, yeah. It's like all of those things were so not what was happening, but that's where the biggest things come from.
Yeah.
So.
Amen.
Yeah. Well, they were all stars, and that was always part of what I thought it should be about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It worked pretty good.
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
We had a great run.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
But so did you, and
man.
and thanks to people like you, that knew the difference.
Yeah.
Everyone did not have that knowledge, but you were kind of, I'd say, successful from the beginning. You might not have made as much money in the beginning, but you did the same things.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, actually, to clarify, I made no money in the beginning, but it kind of my deal was, and it's, if you do the right things, the money follows. But my whole goal when I got to town was to not have to go back, like just to make enough money to stay and be able to work with artists that I wanted to work with, and the kind of artists and creative people that I wanted to work with. So being able to, go to the Bluebird. We just lost him, but see like Don Slitz playing for 30 people when I first got to town, or Fred Noblock, or all the singer-songwriter stuff, because back then the Bluebird wasn't the Bluebird. It was just a place where you saw songwriters. There hadn't been a TV show. It wasn't a social hangout. It was just industry people. You could always get in, and it was usually a third full, and so just being around that to me was just magic, to see those. I mean, it didn't hurt to, that one of those first artists I ran across was Mac, because, just about brilliance, but to see stuff like that and to hear those demos, those guys were doing, and see those guys do their acoustic solo shows to, not a lot of people, but you learn the difference. Like the Bluebird, you kind of, you heard somebody do a song and, you go, well, I think that's great. And then you find out 5 years later, it never got cut, and you hear something else you think's great. And it, winds up being a giant record. And, so that was kind of the beauty of it. But that was, to me, it was just always a passion thing. I just loved songs and songwriters. So just being able to be around creative people that, and hear those records get made, it was, just kind of what led to it working out, I think. So
was Leroy the first artist you signed to a record deal that started really having some big success?
Well, actually we signed.
I mean, John Wesley had some, but we
had some that kept us around, but actually Leroy was the first probably act ever had that wound up having hits, but Leroy actually didn't have hits off that first record. Barry produced that record. It had horns all over it. I still remember we were in a KNX in Phoenix, which was owned by Buck Owens, so you can obviously pretty traditional programming station. And there was a writer there, I'm not going to remember her name, but she wrote for their magazine forever. They had a really big, nice, glossy magazine that went out every month. And we sat down with Leroy thinking, we would be, being welcomed on the road and everything. It was just like, she mentioned, the horns and everything. She just, Now, why do you think you have any business being in country music?
That's not a good way to start.
No, and we had a lot of those. There was a song called "The Rock" that Russell Smith wrote with I can't remember Loggins. Somebody, Russell, I know, was a writer on it, and that should have been a hit. It was like a hit in Dallas. So he would go play Cowboys in Dallas once a quarter. The owner of that venue loved him, and it was a hit in Dallas. So we literally would go play once a quarter for 2 nights the whole first year. But the Leroy thing, Tim Dubois was put my kids through college. So during the Leroy thing, he pitched me. He gave me the Pam Tillis record. And Pam had already had a deal and it hadn't worked out. And sometimes you just get this pre-existing idea of, that it's going to be hard because they've already been out there or whatever. And we were on the road. We had dropped Leroy off at an airport in Houston. And me and Ann Weaver were driving somewhere else to leave. And who was a Southwest regional at Arist at the time, and she had the Tillis record and played it for me, and I heard maybe it was Memphis, and Don't Tell Me What to Do, and the record just blew me away, and so I called Tim. It was on a weekend, so Monday morning, 9:00, I called Tim and said, "Man, I'd really like to take this meeting." He said, "Mister, you just about waited too late, but let me call." So then Pam had a #1 record out of the box, and then when Leroy's second record came. We had hits on that second.
I couldn't remember.
Yeah. So Scott and Barry did the first record, and actually just Barry did the first record. Scott and Barry, I think, did the second record, and then that's kind of when the hits came.
It's funny how you go to those records. You mentioned maybe it was Memphis. We've talked about that record in the episodes we've done. We had Ed C. on. Of course, Ed mixed that
such
record.
A great record.
That record to me stands out, and we talked about this as maybe the best record he ever mixed. It's, how old is that record now? 35 years old?
Still sounds great on the radio.
You hear it on the radio, it sounds like it belongs now. Everything about the song, the performance,
the vocals, it's just magic.
The sound of the record, the sound of the snare drum, I mean, everything. It's just one of those things,
It was there,
and you mentioned that record knocking you out.
And I think that was the fourth single. Because everybody was a little bit afraid of it because it's more contemporary.
Right.
And they actually went back in and did a steel guitar solo instead of that great electric solo. As an alternative to send to country radio. So it just, it was kind of cutting edge for the time.
Yeah, it was.
That writer, I won't forget his name, wrote it by himself. We went through probably 200 songs in his catalog trying to see if there was something else in there. And he had just gone to Memphis and had a moment, man, and that song fell out because there was he was mostly a Christian writer, I think.
Yep.
And,
Michael.
Yep.
No, go ahead.
It was Michael somebody. And it was just that moment in time. But how you can write, I mean, to me, that's like Steinbeck kind of Faulkner-esque kind of poetry in that lyric. And he had one big one.
Yeah,
so I don't know if he ever had. I think he had other Christian cuts, but I don't think he ever had another
no, I don't
country
think
cut.
So. What a great record! Golly, great song.
Yeah.
And she blew up really big all of a sudden. You had like 4 or 5 big records right in a row, didn't she?
Oh, yeah.
I can't remember.
No, I mean, it was the string. I hit, like everything was a top 5. I like a lot of artists. I've heard other artists say that. We had more number 2 records than probably anybody because that was during the Garth era.
Right.
And Garth would camp out at number 1 for like 6 weeks. They finally made a rule, I think, where a song after so many weeks at 1 had to come out. But for a long time, he just didn't move. So you could stay at number 2 for 4 weeks waiting on a Garth record to go away and never get a number 1. You might get it on air check or whatever it was back then. So R&R.
Remember when Dubois used to do that thing and have their own awards and give out to people? He did it 3 or 4 years in a row, and he gave us a number 2 for What Kind of Fool Do You Think I Am?
Oh, did he?
He did. He absolutely did.
Yeah.
Because it was number 1 on one of the small Gavin or something. He said, "Mister, in my book, it's still on number 1. We got it." Yeah, we laughed about that for years.
Which probably got a ton of maybe more played than anything.
Funny.
Oh, that one got a lot, man.
Yeah. But there again, Russ pitched that to us. I mean, it's another one of those that that small circle of things. Russ and I'd met all those years before,
Yep.
and then
Anytime I got a great song, I'd come play it for you.
Yeah, wound up
Even if
having
you
a number
didn't
one
have
record
any-
together.
Even if you didn't have somebody,
Yep.
it always mattered to me what you thought because you listened to songs. You were a song guy,
Yeah,
which was unusual for most, not all, but most
Yeah,
managers.
you pitched Achy Breaky
Oh, it's
for
real
Leroy.
unusual. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did, yeah.
Yeah, I pitched Achy Break for Leroy, and I played it for him. He's like, ain't no way. After it was a huge hit, I was going, man, you sure? What do you think about that? And I said, I'm still glad I didn't cut that. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not so sure. I'm glad you didn't cut that. I'm thinking maybe it'd have been nice if you'd have cut that.
He was probably still mad at me. We had a little falling out there because you'll remember we were trying to sign him to a publishing deal. Actually, before you managed him early on, so I don't think you managed him yet. And we thought we had a deal. We've laughed about this over the years now, but I got really mad at him. God, I was so angry.
So
That's funny.
yep.
So you got to Pam, you got through Leroy, you got Wade going on. So then what happens?
Yeah. So we had a couple of generations of acts. Then after that, we had a nice run with Black Hawk. Had the Dirt Band for a few years.
I
Made a
remember
record with those guys, and then Patty Loveless came into our world. I guess it was maybe like late '90s, something like that. And it was just about the time things were starting to change at country radio, and some of the some really fun projects to work. She made her. We made her a Mountain Soul record as a kind of a side project.
Yeah.
Emery went in for $50,000 and made that record and wound up going out. I mean, when I heard it, it just blew me away. And it was like, we got to go to Kentucky and do the video up there. We got to go up there and do the photo shoot. We got to, this is more than just a little side project that you've been wanting to do. And then wound up on the Down from the Mountain tour that year, and got nominated for a Grammy on that record, and so and that all here we are 30 probably 25 years at least into that my relationship with that career, and then went into the Hall of Fame year before last, which was really great. And
that's great.
Wound up back on the CMAs and did Never Leave Harlan Alive from that record that was 20 years old or something at that point, and a great song and a great performance, So the Stapletons were great and invited her to come do it basically in Chris's slot. One of the most humble things I've ever been part of. She did that song at there was a benefit for the floods up in Kentucky,
right.
and she Chris asked her to come up, so she went up and did the record. And that night, and after rehearsal, actually before she even done it, they said, we need you to have, this is what Chris, you need to come do this on the CMAs.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm just thinking like, everybody's had a glass of wine. It's like, everybody's having fun. That's never going to happen.
So he grew up with Chris, by the way. He's from right up there. He knows all of
yeah. So, and I hadn't met those guys, hadn't been around them. So the next day on show day, I see one of the managers and he's like, hey, they weren't kidding about that. They really want to do that, And I was like, well, great, but it's like a freaking 5-minute song. If you can sell that to the CMA for TV, it's a dirge, as they would always say.
Yeah.
It's like really slow, everything they usually don't want for TV. And they were like, well, Chris has had some pretty good luck with TV and the CMAs, referencing the Justin Timberlake thing. And I think we can probably sell this if we want to. So a funny story. One of the harder things, one of the more awkward things I've had to do as a manager. So when we all agreed to do it, and we get to Chris's big building where the rehearsal space, full stage and everything. And so the conversation was, because this is Chris's slot, it's his CMA slot, was to have him, like do a verse or something. So we get in there, and they're just singing. Chris and his wife are just doing background vocals. It's like they're not. It's Patty singing the whole thing, and I'm thinking to myself, one, it's just not right. It's Chris's slot, and two, we're going to get to the actual CMA rehearsals day, and they're going to go, what happened to our Chris Stapleton slot?
Chris?
Yeah. And so I'm sitting there. So I go over to the managers and go, man, I thought he and Patty had worked this out, one of Chris's managers, and they went, well, man, that's just Chris, that's the kind of, he, I was like, well, why don't you, and they were like, you want to say something like to me? And I'm going like, it's like, not my client, So so I finally type it real big in my notes on my iPhone. I walk up to Patty and go, hey, Chris needs to take him, hold it up. So at that point we kind of worked it out, and Chris wound up, singing a verse. But I'm telling you, it's
That's
just,
great.
what a sweetheart of a couple to pass that off to Patty, and be willing to. I mean, as a manager, I can tell you, we begged, pleaded, and stoled to try to get an act on the CMAs to help support the record that you've got out. To give that away is just like unheard of. You just don't do that. So
that's just Chris.
Oh God, they were so. It's just so amazing. So as a old manager, it was kind of did my heart good to see somebody, that's where he is and having the success he is, that was willing to just do that and to lift her up, which I think was a really big part. Is for people that don't know, the timing. Some great artists that get left out of the Hall of Fame thing just get missed. It's a voting group, it's industry. Top of mind makes a big difference when people are filling those ballots out and getting the people that are kind of on the fringes, especially as the school turns over. There's a lot of younger people that probably don't know, Patty Loveless that well. So having that CMA moment right at the time that people were voting for their, Hall of Fame deals, not that she didn't, would have made it at some point, but she was about to turn into the legacy group, not the contemporary group. Right. And then you're in there with everybody that ever made a record since the history of recorded country music. So, so it was, what they wound up doing was even, the showcase was even bigger than just a moment on TV, for a very old great Daryl Scott song, to get showcased. So
boy, but and against all odds, that's pretty amazing, and what a performance! Golly,
no, it was a
another
moment,
one, man. Yeah,
and I knew when I saw it at rehearsal that night, before the CMAs when we did in Kentucky, it's like, believe it or not, it was even bigger in Kentucky than it was, when we did it at the CMAs. But if you hadn't seen it, if you hadn't seen it, I knew it was gonna blow people's minds, because
they played it in Rupp Arena. And then that boy that played basketball for University of Kentucky was from Harlan, and that's his walkout song.
Oh, wow.
And the place goes nuts every time they play it. So to have her
I didn't even know that. Now they're doing it at the football games too.
Yeah.
So but I had no idea.
Have her there at Rupp Arena singing.
Yeah, it was a chill bump moment for sure.
Wait a minute, they're doing it for the football team and I didn't know they were doing that, basketball and football team.
Yeah, they have Big Blue Madness.
Yeah.
Where each player gets to come out to introduce themselves. Right. They have a walkout song.
Right.
There's 25,000 people there for the introduction.
Wow.
And he used that song, and
that's great.
Everybody in the place getting nuts.
That's great.
That is great. That's
great song.
Cool.
Just they keep coming around.
Yeah. I wonder today, as we're talking about this stuff and the time we put into it and the songs, and even considering the fact that they're going to feature my artist on somebody else's slot and all those things, and stepping up and going, we got to go the right way here, and going back to a song that's that strong. I wonder how many people listen like we used to do today. And again, it always sounds like we're trying to slam the new industry, but you'll remember in Harold's office, he had a box that looked like half a refrigerator box, great big one, full of cassettes and CDs. And if that wasn't enough, on his desk was another mountain about this big, and listening and stuff. And I know how you used to listen. I know I came in on Saturdays after a full week and listened. I wonder if that still happens like that.
Yeah, you hope it does, but I also see there's so many 5 and 6 people co-writes, and I wonder if somebody really broke it down. I can't believe there are as many artists looking for songs as there were back then. Like, I think so many people are writing them with their teams, and if they're not doing that, maybe a song's coming in from somebody else on that team that they didn't write with for that record. It'd be interesting to know just how many artists there are, like a Don Williams that just cut great song, great Bob McDill song after great Bob McDill song, and he was inducted, the same year Patty was at the Hall of Fame, and actually Slits did the induction. So hearing Slits do that induction was pretty, which was great, and then hearing Bob accept, so it was just some really amazing, craftsman with those songs. So
Yeah, man.
I don't know. I don't know if people. I don't think they are, because I don't think that many people are looking for outside songs anymore.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's just a different time.
I don't know. That's how he spent all his time. Everybody thinks he was in the studio making records all the time. Not until he got the songs, and that's what he did the rest of the time.
Yeah.
Listening.
No, I remember I would go up those steps, and you always passed Harold's door if you were going down to see Larry or Your Deal or whatever. And it was always, you would always hear. And sometimes you'd hear like a minute, and then you hear it stop. 2 minutes stop.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
That was the fun, though, man. It's like mining for gold.
Oh, it was. Oh.
It was.
When you heard one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing greater than listening to a really good song and you've never heard it before.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It just gives you a new life.
Yeah.
Gives a song a new life.
Yeah.
Well,
And it goes and does what it's supposed to go do. It's great.
Yeah, man.
Well, you know what? My always first thought about within 2 minutes after you heard that, or an artist brought it back, they've been in a writing session, or they've been out listening to the songs with the producer, and they swing by the office to play me something. My first thought after that last beat was, is it still available? Is it on hold for somebody else?
Yeah.
Like, did we hear it in time? Are we going to call the publisher to put it on hold and find out you're number 4, on that song?
Yeah.
So, and then if you are not number 1, if you're number 2, you're just holding your breath that whoever was supposed to cut it doesn't cut it, so you can get it for your artist.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. But that was the world, and that was the interesting thing about getting a record deal. I was telling somebody the other day, when you got a record deal, one of the big perks, it was like going to work for a big company and getting a company card, to go spend, was I'm going to get to walk into the best publishing companies in the world and get their best songs from the best writers ever. They're going to let me walk in the door, and if I want one of them, I can probably have it.
Yeah.
That was a big perk. So, and back in those, especially in the 90s, we had 3 or 4 meetings every day with an artist coming and looking for songs, at least. And, it's, I don't know.
And I think there was a mentality there, Harold. You as a producer, you may, and at your label time, but I also felt like it wasn't always just like they weren't going to pitch you your best stuff because they were hoping George Strait or Reba or somebody that's already hot. I always felt like that if they liked if they believed in the artist, they would take the chance because they wanted to build those, smart business. You want to build that relationship. But you did, to your point, you did have a chance at the best songs they had. It wasn't like, oh, you're a new artist, we're going to wait and see.
Yeah. No, most of our hits, I think, were first singles on artists.
Yeah.
Achy Breaky. What Kind of Fool? What Kind of Fool is first one? First hit, wasn't it? I think. Take It Like a Man. Yeah. Michelle Wright. They were all the first single.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we weren't afraid of that. If it was Tim DeBar, it was Harold or somebody like that. Go.
Yeah.
Fun stuff. What an exciting time. Golly.
And for the new for the next generation of managers and artists, publishers and producers, I do find it interesting. Like I've really started noticing just in the last year or two, how many independent labels are being successful. And even if they're joint ventures with a major label, it's still the creative and the A&R, and that process is happening, and it kind of reminds me of what, before I even got to town, how there were the Stax and the different, the Malicos, the different labels that were doing things outside of the mainstream. So it's, I'm kind of hoping, from a creativity standpoint, it's getting back to that, where there these more creative centers that are doing things that are, it's not just 4 labels creating, or 4 A&R people or 5 A&R people at 5 labels that are creating everything. So
our buddy Eric Hurt was on here a while back. He's over at Empire, and they had that big Shabuzi record, and that's distributed through, but it's a separate label and a whole group and everything, and so there's a lot of that going on.
It's kind of like we mentioned with Harold's, some of those things that weren't the norms were, that were the biggest things. And you look like, I guess the Morgan Wallen thing came out of independent, right?
Yep.
I mean, there's some of those things are happening.
Yeah, that's true. But Big Loud guys, they're doing great over there, man. They're killing it. Yeah. So I mean, it still happens. I just wonder. It's just a different model, kind of, pretty much. The old, we're going to write them and you're going to record them. For the most part, I think's probably gone. For the most part.
No, well, the beauty was back then, and Harold having come out of radio, it was like in those early days, when we took John Wesley out, there wasn't a lot of interest from Warner Brothers in him. Barry signed him, but you could just tell there wasn't a lot of interest, and I was young enough and dumb enough to not just take that for answer. So we went to see probably 30 radio stations, starting in Nashville, going all the way through Texas. We got all the way, we were like on day 8 in Dallas before a promotion guy for the label ever showed up. We just set it up, went to see the stations and did the thing. And finally somebody showed up, and it's like, I learned later with my next generation of acts that they're supposed to be setting that up. They're supposed to be, but even at that, we walked into Joe Ladd in Houston, Texas with John Wesley and played the record, and he was notorious for, if he didn't like it, throwing it in the trash can while you're sitting there with the artist. And he played it on the air while we were there. You could go into a station, and they would even kind of go, "Hey, turn your radio on when you leave," and they would play it so you could hear it driving out of town, going to the next stop. Man, that was fun. That was exciting to have that kind of relationships. And a lot of those music directors back then, you'd have 10-year relationships, 15-year relationships with them. They'd play that first record, then they'd call you to come in and do a free radio show, and you would do it, and you'd build something in that market, and I mean, that was personal to that station. You knew the guys. I still remember there was on Tillis's first records, there was a station in Beaumont and a station in Fresno that we did early things for, and early kind of free shows, and they put us on a bigger show for not much money, but opening on their big yearly deal. And you could look at SoundScan sales in those markets, and for years, those would be performing better than any of your other markets, like where, because those markets kind of own that artist, because they were there, those fans were there in the early days, and they knew the artist meant something to that market, even though it wasn't like a hometown thing. So that was kind of the beauty of those days at radio before, I think when I first started seeing radio stations, late 80s, early 90s, I think there was one group in the Midwest that maybe owned 3 or 4 stations, Wichita, Kansas, and there were 3 or 4 of those stations that were a group. That was all a group was, 3 or 4 stations. Nobody owned multiple stations back then, so it was all independent decision makers.
Not permissible.
No, you legally couldn't do it. So, no, when we were taking John out to see,
I'm not so sure that's not a good thing.
Yeah, no, it sure was. It was better for music,
It was better for music.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly,
correct.
Some of those guys. When we were taking John Wesley out in that first tour, first time I'd ever gone and done the radio thing, we kept going to stations. We probably hit at least 4 different stations, because we were on Warner's too, that went, man, I'm telling you, Warner's missed this record, and it was on the other hand of Randy Travis. And they were like, well, I don't know why they quit working this thing. We played this thing, the phones are blowing up. And if you recall, they put that out, and then they put the second single out, and then they came back out and re-released on the other hand.
I remember.
It was a giant
I
record,
remember
but
that.
they just but it was we ran across 3 or 4 guys. I'm guessing there were probably 20 that had played it enough that the phones blew up. There might not have been a Randy Travis, which brought the whole traditional thing back. Had not been for a handful of independent thinkers at radio that played it and saw that it was a genuine hit. So a big old hit.
I think that's true.
Yeah, man.
Harold had some radio experiences with the achy breaky guy.
Yeah.
Was that Tampa?
Tampa, yeah.
Didn't want to play it.
They didn't play it for
play
a
it.
long time. Then, there were, I think maybe 147 stations on the panel, and all but Tampa was playing it, and it was number 1.
I wonder who might be wrong here.
Well, the hook you'll love, because Sam Cerami and Gene Hughes were head of my marketing and promotion at the time. And so Sam came in and asked me if I knew. I had been to most stations in the Southeast at some point while I was in radio, and afterwards I did a lot of commercials and and jingles, station breaks, IDs, and a lot of that stuff. And so he says, do you know so-and-so? And I said, I do. And he says, well, he's the only guy not playing Achy Breaky Heart. Would you call him? And I said, I will. And I'm repeating this. We've told this story before.
It's okay. It's good, yeah.
But I don't know.
I don't know it now.
Okay. So I called him, and he says, well, we don't like the song, but I'll take it back in Monday before the staff and our regular meeting and see if I can create interest in it again. And so I said, well, call me and let me know what you're going to do. And he didn't call me, but he wrote me a letter, and so I got the letter, and he had told me, had the PD, the MD, the OM, and everybody, that was involved in programming. And we still think it's another 3-chord country song. And so I took his letter and I turned it over and I wrote him back, and I says, I won't call his name, but I said, this may not help you guys in the future, but it only has 2 chords. and the next week they did go on it.
That's funny.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, short of a burning bush, I don't know what kind of sign they were waiting on for that
no
one, because
kidding.
I don't either.
that record was happening.
It
from,
was.
From the
you couldn't stop. One station couldn't stop it.
No.
No, we knew it was going to go number 1 if they did or did not. But
Yeah.
it's great to have
You want it all.
the panel.
Yep.
Yeah.
They're the guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
No, you want them all.
You want them all.
No, we had somebody, a program director in Houston. It's not with us anymore, and he had been really great for Wade Hayes and played still one of Wade's best markets. Played the first record like crazy. We got on down the line, and at some point he wanted a single that everybody in the label. We went a different direction, and same deal. And we needed this one because we were maybe like 11, trying to get to 10, try to keep the momentum going, and he wouldn't play it, and so I finally just got on a plane by myself, and I'd known the guy. I'd met the guy multiple times. Flew down there, spent about 3 hours with him at lunch, and at the end of the lunch, he said, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "Well, I'm going to go back to the airport, go back to Nashville." He said, "You came down here just to talk to me about this record?" And I was like, "Yeah, man." It's like it's a big market for us. It's a big record. It's a hit. The research is there, and to his credit, he added it. He added it the next week and got us over the hump. It went on to be a went on to be a hit.
Wow. It always amazed me how some of those radio guys and that kind thought they knew better than everybody else.
Yeah. In this case, he just dug in because he didn't get the.
They were all A&R people.
Yeah, they were.
Yeah,
they
were.
But also, on the other hand, I admire promotion and marketing people because that's the toughest job in our industry.
Yep.
I mean, if you can get a record to number 1 on the country radio chart, you have achieved some kind of feat.
It's
man.
Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable, Mike. Yes.
Yeah. And so many of those guys, especially now, it's certainly, there are big corporations and different kind of decisions being made. But, some of those guys at radio were really passionate about music. Sometimes
they were.
We never hear all the same stuff the same way. So sometimes you just get there where you kind of got to show it to them or prove it to them or, give them enough a chance to do it. But it's amazing when one really happens. We've all had a bunch of things. There's kind of like I call them radio hits. They work great on the radio. Didn't really move the touring thing that much. Didn't really move the sound scan. Didn't sell a lot of records. But when you get one of those, it's like we mentioned in Memphis or
it was a chart hit.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Sold no records.
Yep.
Nobody liked it really.
Yep.
But it did its number.
Boy, there were a couple of guys that
followed through with its assignment.
Yeah.
Well, some of those Alabama records and the KT records, for instance, and stuff. I mean, there are things now I'll look at on a chart from back in that era, and I'll have no idea what that song was. And I lived and died by the chart every week, you know. But I mean, those records, those songs, you know those songs, like you're still all these years later.
Yeah. We're talking about those ones the radio guys flew up the charts, and I don't know how they did it. Some of those guys were really good. to get songs up the charts. And we've had this conversation before, but back when the SoundScan era came in, we could actually look and see sales every week. You know, we'd look at
everybody
the
was
charts.
BSing before that.
Oh,
It was just all it was all a shell game.
Oh,
and that was the real truth.
We look at those charts, and Ed C. coined this phrase. He gets mad when I say it, but we'd look at the radio charts and then look at the SoundScan charts, and you'd see the ones that were not selling anything that were still going up the charts. And usually we didn't like them. Ed C. called them booger eaters. So we'd say there's all these booger eaters down here, you know, because you couldn't fool anybody anymore. Then you knew if you had something or not. Yeah. And then you see a record struggling at radio and getting to 25 and selling 1 million records, and you go, something's wrong here. Yeah.
No, I didn't always love that report card every week,
too.
But it was great to have it, and it was great to be able to look at those markets.
Right.
I mean, because that kind of technology had never been there before.
Right.
So the breakdown was you could see every market, you could see where the record was getting played compared to what you'd sold there that week. You know, so or if you tour there, we used to.
Well, you know, some of the people, Mike, that I talked to during that time at radio, and I could actually talk to some of them because I had some radio experience. So. I kind of knew, but some of the guys really loved the music. They were into the music, you know, like right offhand, I guess my favorite of all of those guys was a guy named Rhubarb Jones.
Oh, it's great. Rhubarb was awesome.
Was not he the greatest there ever was?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And everybody knew him. You know,
everybody knew him.
Patty Lovelace and her husband, Emery Gordy, got to see Rhubarb a fair amount because he was at the college, right? He was teaching at the college.
Right.
So I think maybe Emery went down and did something with him at one of the classes or something. Yeah. So since Patty moved to Georgia, they were able to stay in touch with Rhubarb.
He was at Kennesaw.
Yeah. Kennesaw State. Yeah.
So, wow.
But, you mentioned that I don't think there was anybody that was in the music business in that 20-year window of time that did not know Rhubarb.
I don't think so.
It was those.
Well, he was DJ of the Year twice, two different times.
Yeah. So
at two different radio stations.
Yeah. So he was just the kind of guy you always, you always look forward to seeing when you went to the station. He always treated you great, and he was always at the shows if you're playing the market. It was just, there were some great relationships back then with those kind of guys.
Yeah. And they really wanted to help you. You know, that's what they did, because sometimes they became a part of it. They were on the team.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And you get having that relationship.
I love those guys.
Yeah, having that partnership where the artists really wanted to do things for them. Yes. And as you looked up and country got hotter, some of those guys that owned the market forever started having some little competitor popping up over there. So it was great that they had built those relationships because you were going to do for Rhubarb before you did for anybody in that market. So.
Yeah, he'd bury the guy before it was over,
Yeah. See, now I didn't get to know those guys like you guys did. Yeah. Some of them I did.
They were really important.
But you guys spent a lot more time with radio people than I did being a publisher, So I knew some, obviously. But, that's a different world.
Yeah. No, when we would go to, when we went to Bakersfield, we'd see Buck, he would come say hi or whatever,
That's
it's
crazy.
Pretty, it was, so you're sitting there in, Buck Owens Station talking to Buck Owens about records and music, so it was, and the owners of those stations there again, they weren't just some faraway guys. A lot of times the owners, you met the GM and the owner and everything while you were there. It was,
that's cool.
It was
that's
pretty
real
great.
Cool. Well, what's the craziest thing that ever happened to you? What's one of the funniest stories or craziest things or odd things that happened that turned?
Oh man, now you're putting me on the spot.
I know.
I don't know that I've got like a moment. I don't know. There's like one of those things. But just I think. I think in a weird kind of way, some of those early things, like having somebody like a Barry Beckett sign the first act. It's not some outrageous, crazy bus story or anything, but it's just those things where I was such a huge fan of Barry from all those records he had played on and muscle shows. And the reason I got in the door to see Barry is Mike Chapman and Milton Sledge, that played on tons of your records, were doing demos for us. And when Barry, after the studio had shut down on muscle shows, they said, they said, hey, I think we could get Barry to come up and play on some of these demos you're doing. And I was like, we're paying $25 a song, and we were doing 3 or 4 songs in a session. I said, Barry Beckett, who played on Seeger, Aretha, and I was a huge Delbert fan. He produced those Delbert records and played on that. Is going to come to my studio and play on our country demos for $25 a song. So just the surreal factor being in a room with Barry Beckett playing on on your demos, and just that level of just in my mind, star factor.
It wasn't money driven.
No. And they said, Barry kind of just wants to get back in the community and he wants to play and he wants to get back in the community. And sure enough, it led to an A&R job, which led to me, getting in the door and getting an act. But, I think there are moments like that when, it's like a Pam Tillis walking in with the song "All the Good Ones Are Gone" from she had written with what was it? All the Good Ones Are Gone. He'd written with Dean Dillon that day. Didn't get anything, but brought that song in. He sounded like Mr. Haney singing on a cassette version of just him and the guitar. But it was just like obvious that it was just such a song. And then she did it like 3 weeks later, right after they had cut it at the radio seminar, like the big show. She had one of the big spots, big stage, and the whole house stood up. You know,
Yeah.
so it's just those moments like that where you go,
Yeah, man.
you got something, or like with the Patty thing, the CMAs, where you're sitting on the side of the stage and going like, if the power doesn't go out, this is going, anything short of the electricity going out, this is about to be a moment, and then like I said, there's 100 of those being backstage at the on the Down from the Mountain tour, and there's Jerry Douglas and Emmylou and Ralph Stanley and all those guys just sitting around playing Skaggs, and all those guys just sitting there playing together. I'm just going, I'm like right here, they're right here. Like, how did I get in this room? So to me, those are the, those moments, and there's like, I don't know, there's, 100 of them just creatively where you're just going like, I'm just so fortunate to get to see that happened in this kind of space, where, they usually weren't the giant, we're out on the road with George Strait moments, it was more those other kind of moments just along the way. They're pretty great.
No, I get it.
Ralph popped his head in the office when he was in there at one point at my office, and then it was like after the Down from the Mountain tour, it's like, I said, well, Ralph, what are you going to do now? All the success and record. Said, I just don't want to have to go back to playing those mud holes anymore at the bluegrass festivals. And he was dressed in this white suit, pulled up in this big Mercedes S500, just looking like $1 million, and hell, Ralph must have been, I don't know, 80 at the time, so 75, 80.
That's great.
So it's like, at one point I had a John Grady that had the label that put that record out. John gave me a stand-up cardboard cutout. I had it for a year. I still got it at home, but I had it in my office for years, and it was as tall as Ralph was, So when Ralph came in, there's him, and there's Ralph, cardboard Ralph, So
funny.
it's just like knowing his legacy. It's like, there again, I was like, I can't believe like Ralph Stanley knows my name, So
Really.
it's
John Grady was an incredible guy. too.
Great guy.
He worked with us at Mercury, and I love John Grady.
Yeah, another passionate guy about music.
Yep.
Sign great artists, wanted to work with great artists. He actually helped Patty get on the Down from the Mountain tour because Gillian Welch wasn't going to do it. Patty wasn't on that record. She's only act on the tour, wasn't on the record. Gillian didn't want to do it, so Grady played T-Bone, the Patty record, the Mountain Soul record that was out now. And actually just had lunch with Grady. We were doing one of our music-themed cruises I do, and we were in Key West, and Grady and I had lunch in January and got to catch up. So
Tell him I said hi.
I will, living in Key West most of the time now. So.
Love John.
Yep. And that record, talking about people doing outside the box things, obviously that record was his baby. It's a big part of John Grady, and that
He knows how to do that.
That Down from the Mountain record, and which sold the Old Brother record, which sold a bazillion copies, and not your typical thing, not the kind of record that's supposed to sell 3 million copies.
Yeah,
or
came
whatever
out of
they sold.
nowhere.
Yeah,
Golly.
yeah, but he knew, he believed in it. He was
man.
Powerful stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Yep.
Cool.
He knew.
Well, I want to tell you how much we appreciate you coming by
Well, thanks for having me.
and visiting with us behind the shed.
Great.
And I know Russ and Wade, when they told me you were coming, I was elated because we go way back.
Yeah.
You started when my career was just starting, and
Blowing up,
been
I would say.
friends a long time.
No, and I just want to say, man, thanks for all your kindness back then. Like I said, just the stuff like having us at your Christmas deal when there was no reason we should have been there.
Yeah.
So I still probably need to pay you back for that steak. But just every time we saw you in the meal,
You can buy me a tequila, though.
there you go. We'll do that. So we will do that. So
Right. Yeah, man. Thanks, Mike. This has been fun, brother.
yeah, great to see you guys.
God bless you, brother.
Today's episode was brought to you by Wild Bill's Fireworks, PopChevy.com, and the Kent Rose Foundation. This episode is also brought to you by theforkend.com. Tune in next week to the music station, WWCC with Harold Shedd, broadcasting live from beautiful downtown Bremen, Georgia, 1440 on your radio dial. What you just heard just happened. Thank you for listening to Behind the Shed. We hope you enjoyed it. Tune in next week as we go Behind the Shed.